Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to persist data in Docker using volumes. We'll be working with a MySQL container and I'll demonstrate how data is lost when no volume is used, but by using a volume we can keep the data even after the container is removed. Let's get started. Let's start by opening up our command prompt or terminal. You can use any terminal you prefer, but I'll be using Windows. We are going to spin up a MySQL container and take a look at how the data behaves inside the container without using any volumes first. Before we get started with MySQL, let's make sure Docker is installed and working correctly. We can do this by running a simple Hello World container. Make sure the Docker service is running, and you can easily check that by seeing if the Docker icon is available in this bottom right corner. If it's not, then the Docker service is not running. I had to open up Docker right now myself, and now Docker Desktop is starting up. We can do this by running a simple Hello World container. If this runs successfully, Docker is set up properly on your system. As you can see, Docker runs a simple message confirming that everything is working. Now that we know Docker is set up, we are ready to move on to creating our MySQL container. Before we start with MySQL, make sure you have the MySQL workbench installed, as we'll use it later to connect to our MySQL instance. You can download it for free from the MySQL website if you don't already have it. Alright, first things first. Let's run our MySQL container, but without attaching any volume. This means that the data we create inside the container will be lost when we remove it. Let's run our MySQL container, but without attaching any volume. This means that the data we create inside the container will be lost when we remove it. Let's go ahead and run this command. We name the container MySQL container for easy reference. We map port 3306 from the container to our local port 3309. Here we are setting the root password to MySecretPassword. Finally, we will run the MySQL container in the background using the latest version of the MySQL image. Let's go ahead and run this command. As you can see, when you use the docker run command, if Docker is unable to find the image locally, it'll first pull the image and then create the container for you based off of that image. So this will take some moments. Now that the container is running, let's connect to it using the MySQL workbench and create a simple database inside the container to simulate some data. First, we can see our container running using the docker ps command. There it is. Let's open MySQL Workbench and create a new connection. We will just call this Docker without volume. It'll be mapped to port 3309 on our device. And we will remember our password is MySecretPW. Click OK, continue, successful, OK. Now we will run the following commands in MySQL to simulate the data. So we've created a new database and a table within that database and inserted some records. This is stored inside our MySQL container. Now, what happens when we remove the container? Let's find out. Let's stop and remove the container now and see what happens to our database that we created. Remember, since we didn't attach a volume, all the data stored inside the container will be lost. We stop the container with this command, and if we go back here, we will get an error because now this container no longer is running, unable to connect. If we do docker start MySQL container, everything actually restarts it and behaves normally. You need to put the password in, my secret PW. And actually everything behaves normally. But that's still not super useful if you need to make changes or remove the container. So everything gets persisted if we stop and start the container, because the container never got removed. So now we will remove the container. I have to stop it again before removing it. Now let's recreate the container using the same command and check if our database still exists. We will go back here. We can reconnect. As you can see, our database is no longer there, and none of the records are there. If we run the show databases command in a new script, as you can see, our database that we created earlier is gone. This is because we didn't attach a volume, and all the data was stored inside the container, which was deleted when we removed it. Now let's see how we can fix that with Docker volumes. Next, we'll create a Docker volume. Volumes allow us to store data on our local machine outside the container. So even if the container is deleted, the data remains safe in the volume. Let's create a volume called MySQL data. That's it. We've created the volume called MySQL data. Now let's run the MySQL container again and attach this volume so that we can persist our data. This time we're going to run the container. In this command we've added the -v flag to attach our volume MySQL data to this var lib MySQL path. It tells Docker to map our local volume MySQL data to the MySQL data directory inside the container, this /var/lib/MySQL path, because remember, containers have their own file system. We can find out that MySQL stores all of its data from reading the documentation that is posted under the MySQL repository on Docker Hub. Now, any data that we create inside the container will be stored in this volume and persist even if we remove the container. Let's go ahead and run this command. Oh, before I run that command, we need to remove the current MySQL container that's running. Because one of them is when I showed you. First, we need to stop the current MySQL container that is running. Then we need to remove that when I showed you how the data did not get persisted in our new container. Now we can run that new command that I showed here. Let's connect to MySQL Workbench and recreate our database table and records. This time the data will persist because we are using a volume. We see here there's still nothing. Let us create our database and tables and records. Let us see what we have created. We have successfully created our database and table and records again. Now let's see what happens when we remove this container, but since we've attached the volume, the data should persist. Once again, we will stop and remove our container. Now that the container is removed, we will recreate it again, but this time our data will still be there because it is stored in a volume. Once again, let's connect to MySQL and check if our data persisted. I will create a brand new connection called Docker with volume. We listen on port 3309. We will enter that my-secret pw, my-secret-pw, as we wrote in our command. We will continue. Click OK. Continue. As you can see, our database is still there, even though we removed our previous container. This is because the data was stored in the MySQL data volume. We can explore it and see our data is exactly as it was before we removed the container and we created this new one. The great thing about volumes is that they allow us to keep our data safe, even if the container itself is removed. And there you have it. In this video, we demonstrated how Docker volumes work and how they allow you to persist data even when containers are removed. If you found this tutorial helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave any questions in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.